Emotional content is filmed on Whadjuk Noongar land. This podcast acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of country. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Come for the stories, stay for the connection. I'm your host, Amy Jane Brand, and this is your weekly dose of emotional content. Welcome, everybody. Oh my gosh, this is the very first episode. I am recording this pretty close to launch time, actually. I'm a little bit nervous. Actually, I'm a lot nervous. I'm quite a bit nervous, but I'm really looking forward to finally getting this information out there about myself, some amazing conversations with guests. There's just so much that has gone into this project of mine. It's been in the making for over a year now. I've had to do a lot of personal development for years prior. This was always like a really big goal of mine. So I'm just really excited to have you here and really appreciate you for just tuning in and being interested in what direction I'm moving in next with my own career. So I welcome you to my new baby, Emotional Content. If you don't know me, my name is Amy Jane Brand, but you can call me AJ. If you've been following me, you would have noticed that I've been quiet for a really long time now. I've posted little things here and there, but I have completely stopped sharing my life online like I was for years. Honestly, I ended up having to take quite a big, what I would call mental health hiatus off of social media. I was there, but I wasn't really. I was kind of more just watching what was going on rather than being involved with posting my life online. It was something that I really needed to do. I had to work on myself and figure out exactly what I wanted to be doing with my life, and being on social media and posting consistently when I was pretty depressed. Yeah, I really needed to take that time out and just figure out exactly who I am and what I want to be doing. In this episode, I'm going to be giving you some insight as to why I've been so quiet online, what I have been doing with my life up until launching this podcast, and of course, why I decided to make this podcast my next project. Emotional content is an idea that I came up with in 2020. You know, 2020 was absolutely chaotic for everyone. The devastation that was happening with COVID, the borders were closed, everything was just pure panic, really. I had just come back from Los Angeles for my green card interview. My previous visa had now run out at that point and flights had stopped going into America. So I was essentially stuck in Perth waiting for a meeting at the Sydney consulate to obtain my green card. So that was all at a halt, and I was suddenly living back with my mum in Perth. My relationship had also at the time been breaking down for a good couple of years. That's something I will touch base on in another episode, but at the time it was quite difficult going through what was happening there, and I feel like I understood how important it was to be around family through COVID. But yeah, I was going through a really hard time, like we all were. Personal life was chaotic, COVID was chaotic. And at that time, I started doing something that some of you might remember. It was a segment, I'll call it a segment, on my stories on my Instagram called Safe Space. I decided to channel the pain of what I was going through into something that was going to help other people. I had so many people share such intimate information. They were so vulnerable. I felt so honoured to have people comfortable enough to trust me to open up the way they did. There was so many different things that people opened up about, some really heavy subjects. It's not like I felt qualified to be answering, but it was a real honour to be able to share the information on my platform and start open discussions about certain subjects that so many people were going through at the time and still are. And in that moment is when I realized I wanted to be doing that kind of work. I wanted to create more of a community. I wanted to celebrate vulnerability. So with Safe Space came the idea of emotional content and creating things that just had more meaning to it. I was getting pretty sick and tired of doing just the aesthetic fashion stuff on my socials. Like, I will always have a place for that in my heart. I do love the way things look and creating stuff. Like, it's something that I will always be drawn to. But having something to focus on with more depth is definitely where I want to be going. I wanted to come back with something that was actually able to help people. if I can get to a place where that's the type of work I'm doing every day, that's the ultimate goal for me. However, in order to create the community and the type of podcast that I wanted to do, I really had a lot of work to do on myself. And that is something that I focused my time on, getting myself into the right headspace where I feel confident enough, know myself enough, and have done that self-development work to be able to lean in and be vulnerable on the internet. I am somebody that has actually been so private. Like, there would have been times when I was posting online where it didn't seem as if I was being very private, but I think I just played the role really well. I did not open up about what was going on in America. I did not tell you what was happening in my relationship. I hid so many different things that were happening behind the scenes. I did not tell you about the plastic surgery that I had and the failures that I went through with that. There was so many things that people didn't know about me, but they thought they did know me. So in order to create emotional content the way that I envisioned, I needed to be willing to lean in and get vulnerable. I had to open up about all the things I never wanted to tell people. If I ever wanted guests to come on and be willing to do the same, I really needed to set the intention and the tone of the podcast as well. So some of the things I'm talking about on this podcast, not even my family knew about. I've had to give them a bit of a warning now. I had to give my mum a heads up on a couple of things. She took it really well, thankfully, but I think my mum and family really understand the vision that I have with this as well, especially my partner. Oh my gosh, Frank has just been such an incredible support through this whole process. I don't think I could have done this without him, if I'm being honest. So it took a lot of inner work. It took finding my circle of people. It's taken just a lot to be able to get to this place. So emotional content is about creating emotional content. It's about connecting with people. It's about so much more. This is not a gossipy podcast. This podcast is here to make people feel seen and understood, a platform where you're seeing behind the airbrushing of Instagram, behind the facade. Now, for the name, obviously emotional content, everyone will get that one, but it is actually a play on words, which I personally love. There's emotional content that I'm making and my guests will be creating with me, but there's also the fact that we're searching for emotional content. So just being emotionally content in your life means that you're just at peace. And I feel like that's something that we're all searching for. I know I'm searching for that. Now, look, I'm not there yet. I'm not emotionally content with my life. In fact, to be honest, I decided that I was never going to be perfectly healed in order to do this podcast, but I was able to get myself in a place where I felt confident enough to be authentic and really own who I am online. I wouldn't say I'm somebody who has it all together, and I'm definitely not here to tell you how to live your lives, but you can think of me like a big sister, here to talk things through with you, bring you along my journey and tell you what I've learned along the way. So, seeing as I have never done this before, I thought I'd give you a short rundown of my life from the very beginning so you can get to know me a little better. I was born in the UK, 24th of December, 1990. Yes, Christmas Eve. It is not the greatest birthday. And I moved to Perth, Western Australia, when I was just 4 years old. I moved over with my mum, my dad, my two brothers, and my sister. My siblings are half, but I consider them my full, and I have never seen them as anything but my full blood siblings, but they do have a different father to me. My mum had my brothers and sister much younger in her previous marriage and then had me later when she married my dad. When it comes to school, I had a pretty rough time from primary school all the way up till about year 9, 10. I was bullied heavily, mostly by boys, sometimes by girls, which was pretty hard to navigate at the time. When I was 6 years old, my dad had his first heart attack and was eventually diagnosed with a heart disease called cardiomyopathy, which develops as a weak and enlarged heart. During school, I was extremely depressed, anxious, and struggling with ADHD. All of these things went undiagnosed until I was an adult. Mental health was not taken seriously when I was younger. I think that's why I'm so passionate about it now. Even when I was younger, I would struggle with anxiety attacks, and I had GPs telling me that it was potentially asthma. I've never had asthma before, so it's bizarre how little information there was out there about it at the time. but I had been struggling with anxiety attacks from primary school. It's wild to me that that was never picked up on. And ADHD in girls, oh my gosh, like that's totally overlooked. I'm so happy that it's different now and it's being way more widely recognised because it was something that was so isolating. Growing up with a sick parent in and out of hospitals for years wasn't the best childhood, but we were all doing the best that we could at the time, and that's all anybody can ever do. Watching my mum keep the family going during my dad's illness it was hard to watch, but I'm just so thankful for having a mother that was willing to work multiple jobs to keep the family going, keep the clothes on my back. My dad was unable to work. He was originally a helicopter pilot, and obviously when you have any sort of medical issue like that, you cannot be flying. And he got progressively more and more sick, so he wasn't able to work. So mum was the breadwinner of the family and she worked her ass off. She was picking me up from school. There was so much that mum was doing. Watching her struggle was really quite difficult as well, but it also taught me a lot of resilience and really put things into perspective of what was important and what wasn't. Looking back, I understand now why I was so rebellious as a child. I mean, I really was. I seriously was a little shit. I do feel regrettably quite bad for what my mum had to deal with. But I understand it now that I'm older and looking back. I really just wanted to escape what was happening at home and then what was happening at school. So I developed this escapism pretty early on in my life. So I get it now, but at the time I was an absolute handful. When it came to school, I was in and out of suspension, whether it was in-school suspension, timeout, whether it was out-of-school suspension. I got in a lot of physical fights when I was in school as well. I mean, I don't condone physical fighting at all, but back then, the only way that people stopped giving me a hard time was by getting in fights. I had so many different things happen in my school that were just like, I just don't even know. It would never be allowed to happen now, but the amount of shit that happened when I was at school was wild. I ended up getting expelled from another school as well. I was in the middle of a fight with another girl at the school and I ended up physically assaulting the teacher that got in between us. So I got an immediate expulsion from that school, and rightly so. I would skip school often to just go and smoke weed with my friends. I was smoking weed pretty early on in my life and drinking. I was up to all kinds of mischief. The principal actually had my mobile number when I was in high school and would call me and be like, "Why are you not in class?" And I was honestly half-baked. I had no respect for school whatsoever. So I am a high school dropout, year 11. I decided to leave. Honestly, it was the best thing that I could have done because I had been so naughty throughout my schooling that even when I did try to kind of clean my act up, the teachers weren't really giving me the time of day. Someone would do something in the class and it would be immediately blamed on me. Like, I didn't want to go to university. So yeah, high school till year 12 felt pretty pointless for me. Unfortunately, I had my dad who was absolutely adamant that I was going to university. He was really old school. He couldn't understand why I was so naughty at school. So that caused quite a bit of grief for me and my mum. I was just a really angry kid. Like, the environment that I grew up in, the shit that I had to see in and out of hospitals, seeing the things that I did with my dad's health, I was angry. I was pissed off at the world. By 13 years old, my dad had had a heart transplant. It's something that we had been working towards for quite a long time. I will do a separate episode on this so that I can really talk to people about what it's like losing a parent. But holding my dad's hand while we took the life support off and letting him slip away was by far the hardest thing that I've ever had to go through in my life, especially as young as 13 years old. Yeah, it really shaped me as a person. After my dad passed away, I went into a really big downward spiral. I dabbled with a lot of different drugs, alcohol, partying. I was very young, obviously, but that really didn't change things. I had gotten involved with quite a lot of, I'd say, dodgy people, and I was up to all kinds of shit. It's a good thing that there wasn't phones everywhere, Snapchat and things like that. I was just in such a downward spiral, and unfortunately, I did have 2 suicide attempts when I was younger, so that was very difficult on my mother and my family, and I'm so thankful that those attempts did not have success. Otherwise, I obviously wouldn't be here today to talk about it. It was a cocktail of self-destruction and total escapism, and I was just running away from the problem with any substance that I could find. After studying for a year at the Australian College of Beauty Therapy, I then got my diploma, my beauty diploma, which I was very happy about. And I got my first job at David Jones on the YSL counter, which I really liked because I was like, beauty, YSL, thriving. But it essentially was an extremely boring job. I was just standing there all day and then sometimes applying makeup onto people. So that was my first ever job. It was just so quiet and boring. I actually ended up leaving that job because my boss at the time was letting everybody else go away for the weekend or a few days for schoolies. They call it leavers in Perth. I'm going to call it schoolies because most of you will know that it's schoolies. Anyway, everyone was going down south and I asked for the time off and she wouldn't let me. So I was getting phone calls from my friends at schoolies being like, oh my God, where are you? Come down. Obviously I wasn't still at school, but it was my year 12 graduation year. So everyone was like, just come down. So I ended up telling her that I'm going whether she likes it or not. And I quit. So that's pretty much, that was the short-lived job on the YSL counter. My next job was at Ella Bache. I did a lot of Brazilian waxes and I did not essentially enjoy that. That's not really where I wanted to go with beauty. Actually, I wanted to go into injectables, but I ended up just changing jobs so much because of the ADHD, which I didn't know that I actually had at the time. I went from Ella Bache. Then I started doing beauty therapy from home, which was fun. I actually liked doing that. Then after that, I got my Cert 3 and 4 in fitness because I wanted to be a personal trainer. I liked the idea of the flexibility with that. I loved connecting with clients and just having that little community of people that I was working with. The only thing I hated was working at the gyms that I was at. They had a certain amount of sales you needed to hit, selling personal training sessions in bulk, like packs. And I'm not a fan of hitting sales targets. So yeah, I kind of lost the love for that job after a few years of doing it. At 19 years old, I had just finished building my first house with my ex-boyfriend, who was my first serious relationship. I know that sounds wild, but yeah, full transparency, when my dad passed away, I ended up inheriting part of the life insurance that he had. So I wanted to do something constructive with that money. I didn't want to blow it. I got it at a very young age and I just wanted to do the right thing. So I invested it into property. Yeah, I just didn't really want to tell you guys that. And then you'd be like, how the fuck did this bitch build a house at 18, 19 years old? After building a house, I had this newfound passion for the building industry and interior design. So you guessed it, I did another career change. I ended up working for 3 different building companies. The first one was a really big one here in Perth, and I actually ended up getting fired as a receptionist for that job. I was kind of planning on working my way up in the company, but yeah, I ended up getting fired because I wasn't dressing appropriately enough as a receptionist. She told me that I looked like Lady Gaga with my red lipstick and nose ring. So yeah, I didn't really suit the look for a receptionist in that company, which is totally understandable. But me being me back then, I wasn't going to change my look for anybody, which is just fucking hilarious. After that, I worked for 2 different building companies, one as a scheduler. I was doing a traineeship. So scheduling is basically, what's the best way I can put this? Scheduling is basically organising all of the orders for every single thing that needs to be done to build that house into one big file and organise it all, which got really fucking repetitive. And yeah, I just didn't really enjoy it. I think I did that for a year. I ended up leaving that place because the boss that I had was actually a massive creep and the things that he was doing was so inappropriate. I mean, I would have reported it now, but back then it was kind of I'm just going to go because this place sucks anyway. So yeah, I moved on from there fairly quickly. The third building company I actually went and worked for, I was there for a little bit, but I just ended up leaving because I had the next dream of being a model and moving over to the East Coast. During that time, I was going through quite a rough breakup with my ex who I built the house with. Yeah, I ended up getting pretty lost again. And a few months later, I ended up dating a guy that was a really huge mistake. I wasn't with him for that long, and I might talk about that in another episode, but he was physically and emotionally extremely violent. It was a very difficult time in my life. Even though that relationship didn't last long, I ended up being left with quite a few big emotional scars from that. And it was interesting at the time as well, because when I did end up telling some people what had happened, because they were so used to me being this like strong person in the group, and I always put on this strong exterior, when I did open up about the physical abuse that happened, it was received with them being shocked that I would let that happen. Yeah, it was a really difficult time for me to come to terms with the fact that I had actually been through that. That relationship had gotten me into some pretty heavy drug use at the time. So I was going through these really heavy come downs. I felt like I was really at risk of doing something stupid. And ultimately, I ended up making the decision that I'm either going to stay in Perth and potentially lose my life because I'm around the wrong people, or I am going to get myself out of here and I'm going to push for my goals and dreams and make something bigger for myself and get myself out of this toxic loop. This is why I really believe that having the dream of being a glamour model actually saved me, because if I didn't have that dream and I wasn't so insistent that I wanted more for myself, then I just don't know where I would have been otherwise. Moving to the Gold Coast was so liberating at the time. I sold my car, I packed up a bunch of suitcases, and I just got onto a plane all by myself and was like, I'm getting the fuck out of Perth. Even though it was so difficult leaving my mum, I just knew that it was something that I had to do for myself. I had such a fun time living on the Gold Coast. I made so many friends and I made so many connections in the industry over there. I just felt like I wasn't confined to this glass box of people's attitudes in Perth. As much as I love living here now, back then it was a different place for me. There was so much homophobia. I know that definitely still happens, but back then it was just gross. And it never felt like this could be a place where you could dress differently or be different. So it just didn't gel with me at all. But when I went to the Gold Coast, everyone just was more open and there was so much more diversity. It just felt like freedom. Like Gold Coast at the time represented freedom for me. And if I had to move somewhere else in Australia, it would probably be the Goldie. Back then, Instagram was booming and I was working with a lot of photographers. So I was basically posting my portfolio of work online. And yeah, my Instagram blew up very, very quickly. Mind you, back then I was basically posting my asshole on the internet. Like everything was very risque compared to what I post now. Back then it was all like Zoo Weekly style, Maxim, FHM. It was very different compared to what I'm posting now. By 22, I had really gotten my name out there. I had 3 separate Zoo Weekly covers. I had features in International and National, Maxim, FHM, Sports Illustrated, Playboy, but non-nude. Yeah, I'd really done a great job of getting myself out there. Then after that, I moved to Sydney with a guy that I started dating not long after I moved to the Goldie. He was a DJ, and that's also how I ended up learning how to mix myself. Honestly, it felt like I just lived out of suitcases throughout my entire 20s. Like I didn't have a car until I moved back to Perth. Like no shit, I didn't have a car because I was always just moving around different states. I lived in the Goldie, then Sydney, then I ended up going to Los Angeles and I moved to LA by myself. I decided that my career was only going to be able to get bigger if I went to America. Now looking back at it, I'm like, fuck, I had some balls because like, would I move countries by myself now? Probably not. So I started the visa process to get myself over to LA, and by the time I was 23 years old, I was living in LA by myself in a small apartment on Hollywood Boulevard, right next to the Roosevelt. When I arrived to that apartment, it was actually the first time seeing it in person. So I organised that lease online and then just rocked up, like wild. After almost a year of living in LA, I ended up moving back to Australia. I have a whole episode as to why, and that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. You'll see that, but that goes into way more detail about the visa and all the process and everything with that. So back in Australia, I ended things with the DJ that I was dating. We were still dating long distance and seeing each other when I was living in LA. He would fly over often and I would fly back to Sydney. So when I moved back, I ended things with him and I ended up moving up to Brisbane. So by this point, I'd left Perth and I had lived in the Gold Coast, then down to Sydney, then to LA, and then to Brisbane. So yeah, I bounced around a lot. I ended up meeting my now ex in Brisbane. I know I have been back to back in relationships. I'm well aware of that. I haven't actually had that much time single. I've always been in relationships. I wouldn't say that there's ever a right or wrong time to get into the next one, but I think I definitely could have given myself a bit better breathing space, like given myself like a year or two would have probably been good. I just think I've always been a hopeless romantic. From here, I really started focusing on my DJing. If you don't know, I was a heavy bass trap dubstep DJ. It was kind of like my alter ego. I really loved playing music and putting on an awesome show for people. So you can actually still find some of the mixes on SoundCloud if you are interested. They're pretty good for when you're going to the gym or like pre-gaming. Bit of a vibe. If you wanted to check that out, you are more than welcome to. It will be under my name, Amy Jane Brand. During that time, I continued working on getting my US visa, and within a couple of years, I was living back in Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles for 3 years, and I was basically spending most of my time on and off tour with the Chainsmokers. That's who my ex was working with. So that was pretty much my life over in LA. I had some really good times, some really shitty times. Yeah, it was definitely an experience, and I met some really incredible people, like people that I would call friends forever. So I do really love the American people. They're just so welcoming, and I have a lot to tell about my experience living over there, touring with the Chainsmokers, just living that kind of lifestyle. So I will do a separate episode on that one. Back when I was living in LA was actually when I became friends with Michael. We got chatting, I think through an email. Yeah, we got chatting through emails, and then we finally met up when I came over to Australia for a little trip back, and we've been best friends ever since, literally inseparable. I was taking trips every 3 months, just back and forth. Michael was coming over to me, I was coming over to him, leaving out a lot of details and keeping the story short. I obviously came back in 2020 during COVID for my green card interview. If you didn't know, you have to come back to your home countries to do those interviews. So I came back for that. It was something that I had been working on for years and spent so much money on. Like, that green card was a huge goal of mine. That dream was something that I cut short because I ended up forfeiting my green card, and I decided after 10 years of being away, I was officially going to call Perth home again. I swore that I was never going to come back to Perth. So to call it home again after being away and running from my problems for 10 years, it was such a big deal for me. I love being here now though. Oh my gosh, being in Perth, I kind of can't imagine living anywhere else again. It's just such a beautiful lifestyle here, but I think it's because of where I'm living now compared to where I was living back with my mum. After going through that bad breakup, keeping it all off of social media and everything that happened following that, I eventually stopped posting online altogether. I had just lost my passion for wanting to share online. But fast forward to now, I'm 33 years old and I can officially say I am the happiest I have ever been. I have a gorgeous partner that I have been with for almost 4 years, and we're living in my favourite part of Perth in Fremantle, Western Australia. We are in our first home together, and it's this beautiful old Italian house that we still need to renovate. We've just had so many things going on that renovating has been slow. I'm just so happy now, and I'm just living such a peaceful life compared to what I was in my 20s. And I think that's why I'm so happy to be more settled down now, and just being so grateful for this little life that I have now. And our little cat Truffle, well, he's not little, he's like fucking 7 kilos. He's a big Maine Coon cat, but he is our world at the moment. So living this beautiful life together has just been something that has been so healing for me in so many different ways. It's really fascinating how much I was running away from Perth and the pain that I was carrying with me. It didn't matter where I went, it still followed. And yeah, looking back at it now, it's really interesting. Until I faced off with the reality of it, thanks to COVID, one, I don't know whether I ever would have looked at myself and looked at my situation and made those changes. And two, if it wasn't for COVID, I don't know if I ever would have met Frank. So COVID ended up being one of the best things that's ever happened to me in a really strange way. I've always, as a perfectionist, I've always wanted my life to look a certain way online, and masking myself for so long has been truly so exhausting. So I feel like I really needed that break to recenter myself and figure out, you know, what I wanted to be posting and how I could get to a place of transparency with, you know, so much fear around being judged by people. The emotional investment that I have put into this podcast has been by far the scariest. Obviously, you put a financial investment into things, getting equipment, getting a production team and things like that. But the emotional investment in this has been so scary and something that I've had to work so hard on. There's been days I've wanted to give up and out of fear, just throw the whole thing away and not do it. So as scary as this feels, I think by the time it does all go live, it will be super liberating. However, the process to making this happen has been absolutely terrifying. Honestly, if you told me 5 years ago that I would be spilling all my secrets online, talking openly, telling you about the plastic surgery I've had, all these different things, going into detail about all my struggles, I never would have believed you. Like, I always had to have things look and feel a certain way to other people. So for me, I am so far out of my comfort zone. It's not funny. And to be honest, the other scary aspect of this is having to now post online really consistently. When I've been offline for so long and just posting like tiny little things here and there to now committing to posting really consistently again, that is really scary for me. I've had a lot of anxiety about it, like getting back on camera, on stories, talking, sharing, being open. Yeah, there's a lot of layers as to why this is such a big jump, but I am really excited about it. It will be good to be active and to talk to you all, obviously connecting with you all on such a deeper level now. During my time off of posting regularly, I really noticed the negative thoughts that were creeping into my head. I noticed how I was comparing myself from seeing these seemingly perfect lives online, all these perfect curated videos, noticing how it was negatively affecting me. Always being flooded with that perfection was really interesting, especially when I know some of these people personally and I know the realities of their life, and I still was getting affected by it. It made me think deeper into how important it is to show up and be vulnerable online. Not everything has to be really personal, but I think showing the realistic side of our lives is not only important for people following, but also important for ourselves. So that's what drove this passion to further build emotional content. There's so much strength in vulnerability, and I hope that this podcast helps to break the stigma and stereotypes around being open emotionally. I'm doing this project for my younger self, who once didn't have that many people in her corner when she was going through some really dark times. So I hope that building this can be a safe space for anybody going through the same. By fully opening up to you guys the way that I will be, I hope that this inspires you to get vulnerable and gives you the courage to start stepping into your authenticity and being yourself in a world that is trying to shape us to be someone different all the time. I have such big plans for emotional content. This is more than just a podcast to me. It is a movement. It is a place where you can go to make you feel good. So make sure that you follow the emotional content Instagram, the TikTok. It won't just be me in the podcast. I'm going above and beyond with the content on there. So if you want that type of content on your feed to make you feel good, to inspire you, to look after yourself, to ask those deeper questions, then make sure you go ahead and follow. I will leave the link in the description. And I just love you guys so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. All of your support is so appreciated. This is my baby, and I'm just so excited to share her with you and put it out into the world. I love you so much. Thanks for listening. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a share. You never know who might need a little emotional content in their life. For daily feel-good posts, follow @_emotional content on Instagram and TikTok. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you're notified every time a new episode drops. Your support means the absolute world to me.